Thanks for joining our session. Today we'll be talking about culture and relevance and purpose-driven marketing in the digital ecosystem. Today I have with me Asiah James, who is the Director of Emerging Audiences at Condé Nast, and I'm Khari Motayne, the Associate Director of Multicultural Strategy at Direct Agents. One, welcome Asiah, and then two, I think to start out, it's been a really big year, I think, in terms of culture and marketing and the way how brands have been approaching really purpose-driven marketing. So I guess on your end, are you seeing the same thing at Condé Nast?
Yeah, for sure. And thank you for the intro and excited to be here
Sure.
to walk through this work. But on Condé Nast, this is a new approach for us. So I want to be completely honest. And when we speak about emerging markets, audiences, and just all inclusivity, we're figuring out those trends, and we're a 100-year-old company. So we have natural IP in these spaces where these audiences have gravitated to us for many, many years. But we've never taken onus on really understanding how these people want to show up in our universe or what they're expecting from us. So I'll say the impetus of the emerging audiences team is to really understand and discover some of that IP awareness that we already have by also crafting it with I would say, those derived and inheritable conversations that are happening throughout the world to really power thought leadership and inclusive campaigns.
Yeah, so we see that a lot. I think we were just talking before this in terms of how brands have been looking for areas to really partner and build like this adjacent authenticity with a lot of their consumers. And I think a great example of this recently was with the Calm app and even Sweetgreen, like really partnering up with Naomi Osaka as she was kind of raising awareness on mental health. And I think that that's like a huge, obviously, cultural conversation, especially after the pandemic. So, I think for brands out there that are looking to really join the conversation, it can be a little bit of a daunting subject. I think a lot of brands, that's the first question that we've been working with is, how do we even begin? So from that standpoint, how would you recommend or what kind of conversations you've been having to really address that? How do we start? Where do we start?
That's a great question. And to be honest, everyone's in a different stage. So that first initial introduction to emerging audiences, especially on the commercial end, when we're talking about driving thoughtful campaigns, we want to know, what are your values in this space and what are you doing to really dedicate your time and I would say your values to this audience beyond monetary, gain. So we start with a full scrub on what partnerships are you developing? How are you employing and developing your retention process for these communities before we even speak dollarship. And I know, Condé Nast, we have had our fair share of rewards and also challenges in this space as well. So being really upfront where we are in the process is, I would say, step one. Step two from there, it's really looking at the cultural calendars of these organizations and some of the products, and do they actually serve these audiences that they wish to go deeper with? And then because we're a content house, and that's our IP for sure, right? We're sharing what are the organic conversations that editors are creating amongst our world, and then how can we join you in those conversations if you're ready for that? Or how do we create a new one together? And I think that's what's so exciting about my team and this role, and especially being at Condé Nast, where people trust us to start a new cultural moment. When you think of Condé Nast and say you take Vogue, for instance, you synonymously think the Met Gala and what that means for a cultural moment. That is our, IP moment that we surround, that really is a juggernaut for social media, for entrepreneurship, for celebrity. What is that moment for, say, those in multicultural and growth audiences? That's how we're really challenging our partners to think. But again, I want to reiterate that everyone is on a different journey, and some just really want to join in on our successful, relationships that we have with these audiences, and some are ready to really take it to the next level and really dive in and create impact for these communities.
I think that I like what you said in terms of the impact piece, and especially when we're talking about getting in the weeds with these communities, because I think a lot of brands, the approach is often, hey, what can we do in this one singular moment? But I think a big piece that we've been talking about, and it sounds like Condé Nast is approaching it the same way, is how do we make this a long-term strategy, and how do we build those relationships in the long term? So how do brands approach that? Where I guess the first start it is that cultural calendar, but can you talk us through like some of the processes in terms of like identifying what are some of the key cultural events for each brand?
Yeah, for sure. And I'll start with for our brands, we have key cultural and tempo moments that matter and over index with many communities. And then secondly, we're really, and myself specifically, especially being so client facing, pushing our partners to think beyond heritage months, especially when we talk about diverse communities. Okay, we understand that this is a highlight reel moment. It should definitely be celebrated and it should be a marker on your calendar, but these folks are around the other 11 months of the year. And what are you doing to constantly engage them? I know that sounds really nuanced and like duh to us and those in that space, especially if you're a person of color doing this work. But I have to sometimes take a step back and even again look at those cultural calendars and realize I am programmed on a 12-month slate as well. And I have products that are launching in certain times. So we're really working together. Again, when I spoke in the last question of really identifying those moments outside of that highlight reel moment that could really be an uptick for that community. I'll give you an example, especially for the beauty community, which I will say has been ahead of the curve, especially when we think about growth and diverse audiences and embracing that, because that's just what we have to do in that space. It's an endemic brand to Condé Nast. I would say scope to Condé Nast brands, but we will say you don't need to just surround them. What about summer travel? It may not be a huge call out moment that you have thought of for beauty, but when you think about how the Black and Latinx and AAPI communities take on travel and take on the nuances of returning home or really sharing their money or understanding even girls' trips, is very nuanced and different from the general market. That could be a huge cultural moment that we, Condé Nast, can create with you to really drive impact in this community beyond Black, Latinx, and History Months. So we're really trying to find, again, those narratives when we're looking at our SEO practices and understanding here are articles we've written 5 years ago that are resurfacing in a really unique way with diverse communities. Remember, they're looking at the prices or they're looking specifically at retail brands and how they're identifying different products for them. We can create a larger story there, but I don't think no one has ever taken the time to share, hey, outside of that 1 month of the year, what are they enjoying? And that's how we're really approaching our business. And it's been successful so far.
Going beyond Heritage Months is such an important factor of this. We always talk about it is, that 12-month engagement. And I think it has to be that consistently. One, it's not static, right? I think that a lot of times we see that there are cultural events. I mean, Juneteenth is actually a perfect example. We're just coming off of that, but that was something where even 2 years ago, it was something that I observed, but it's definitely not something that I would say was broadly accepted. And I think that obviously that's the most extreme recent example, but in general, cultural moments are constantly shifting. Cultures are constantly shifting, and I think emerging, if you will, if you'll let me be punny a little bit there, but how are these emerging markets playing into building that purpose-driven ecosystem in the branding world?
Yeah, and to keep moving with that word emerging, it's also identifying that even though the spending power and their impact is emerging and always ever changing, these communities have always been around. So we're really challenging the industry to keep up. And I'll say the way that we're working with them in other ways is identifying trends through our SEO practices, cultural narratives that are derived from these communities, as well as their behavioral tactics. So that could be generational differences, that could be where they consume content. So we can really get nuanced with some of these insights. And we have to be frank that a lot of insights around inclusive and growth audiences just has not been there in the right ways. So we're really, I think Condé Nast is in a great space where content is always coming out from us, where we can constantly evaluate how they're understanding and interacting, and where they're coming to us from, because I will say, especially for the multicultural communities and specifically for Black and Latinx, they're coming through SEO and they're coming through search. How do we get them to dedicate and graduate with Condé Nast brands is what we're constantly looking at. And then we're ensuring that we're providing them with resources to fuel the rest of their life, or when they're always looking for, our example of summer travel, or they want to dive deeper into a celebrity that they have like-minded with. And you mentioned Naomi Osaka, we make sure that we had those people at top of mind and covering them all year long. Therefore, we're carrying those communities in different conversations, again, beyond those highlight reel moments.
Right. I think, I'm glad that you said that they've always been there. We've been working along this concept of them having been emerged into this general audience for a long time. And from that standpoint, we always recommend that it has to be a part of the holistic conversation with each brand. And I think a lot of brands struggle and they say, okay, let's have, our maybe an emerging marketing coordinator or something along those lines and have that person run through it. But how have you or how would you recommend brands approach it in terms of engaging with the full marketing team, and really, how each element of this really kind of plays into it?
Yeah, and I want to be honest, we're still trying to figure out the best way to do that, because while I think the notion of Beyond Heritage Months is landing really well, the way you plan for media and campaigns is, I'm being asked right now, what are the big moments of 2022? But if you really want to be organic and reach these communities, like we're thinking about our big tempo moments of next year, but we wouldn't really know those nuanced conversations of, say, Naomi Osaka backing out of her challenges to take care of herself until we approach closer to those moments. Right. So we're needing to share and recommend to our partners to say, we know factually, based on what I was sharing earlier, SEO practices, evergreen moments that over-index within these communities, these will be major hits where your products or your recommendations should definitely be a part of. And we develop that relationship always on, so that the other piece, when timely conversations, say around mental health, which is a thread all year round, but has a huge scope right now, you are the first person to get that first look, to really join in and make that top of mind as one of the values for your brand. I'll say my team, and that's why it's so interesting that you said, building out a separate coordinator or bringing somebody on for that team. We were very intentional with the naming, and it was shaky in the beginning of calling it emerging audiences, because we want to get to a place where it's interest and trend based, and you won't want to stay in a place where it's, we want to reach Black and Latinx audiences. I go into meetings now, in my third and fourth meeting with the same client, like, okay, so Black as in derived from the Caribbean or Afro-Latina, are they Southern, are they Midwestern? What does that mean? And then generationally, are they over 40? Are they 18? You can challenge them a bit more, and then your partners take it back to the drawing board, and then we can find directly what they're looking for. But I think we have to work together to find out who that target audience is. So it's really redefining, in short terms, redefining that cultural calendar all year round.
Right. I think that there's a huge opportunity in terms of the intersectional identity piece of this as well, in terms of what types of conversations are emerging. For example, obviously, even Juneteenth, for example, is obviously landing in the middle of Pride Month. And there are a lot of, intersectional conversations that are coming out of that brands that are really starting to tap into cultures have to be, at the very least, aware of those nuances, if not actually, finding avenues for them to participate in as well. So I guess taking it to that, which I think that with that nuance, it becomes a very broad web. So how do you guide brands, and I have my own take on this as well, but how do you guide brands into where to insert yourself into the conversation, and where to really, talk about some of these cultural moments?
Yeah, for sure. And I think to that point, it's starting with the values of that brand, the core values and the core ingredients, I would say, of the product, and who are they supposed to service. And then understanding who is that target audience, really defining and narrowing down who that person is and giving them an archetype. And I would say less of a persona, and those can be a play on words, but we don't want to say it's Joe Schmo doing this and doing Y, because we don't know what they're doing on the internet to really track them. Again, these audiences have not been followed enough for us to really zero in. But if you pare down the products and the scope values, along with the, I would say, likeliness of the person that you're trying to reach, we are recommending that pairing along with our content is the best way to move forward for an always on conversation. I would take it a step further, even to talk about the Juneteenth narrative and the intersectionalities. It's very difficult to align with moments like that, because, to be frank, as a Black woman, aligning with Juneteenth, this was not a moment. It's a moment to celebrate, for sure, but it's not a moment that we asked to celebrate. It's not a big, it's not one of these cultural moments like Christmas, and it's like we wanted this to happen. It would be great if we didn't have to celebrate Juneteenth, if it never existed. So to align your brand with a moment like that is a really difficult conversation to have with clients who have never done the due diligence to really celebrate, even though, it is a moment to celebrate, if that makes makes sense, Khari, because I want to be realistic that you can put your product next to Juneteenth, but I'm not sure how many people of color and many Black people were really chasing all of the discounts this weekend.
Right.
I even heard friends in the industry, like, if you're going to support brands this weekend, like, don't buy your Juneteenth, shirt from the biggest retailer in the world, like, try to buy them from the community, because this is something that may turn into Taco Tuesday. And we want to be really cognizant of that. So of me being at a place like Condé Nast, while that's my recommendation to work with us, I really have to challenge our partners that when we get to that moment for me to recommend something so amazing for you, there's many little breadcrumbs that you need to spread before you're able to celebrate along with this community.
I agree. And especially, it can't be hey, we're going to advertise on Juneteenth, and then it's like, okay, we'll see you Black History Month next year. In that sense, I agree. There does have to be that conversation, but I'm glad that you brought up relevance, because I think relevance is a big partner to authenticity. So I think that that always has to be the undertone, is this authentic to our brand? Have we done the work? Have we put in the effort to really build that relationship with the community? Or are we just saying, okay, we're gonna, we haven't really said anything since Black History Month. Let's try and highlight X, Y, and Z cultural moment. But then I think that's the other question, is that a lot of brands are afraid to even go out there with cancel culture and a lot of these other factors. Is there what would you say to some of those brands that are hey, I want to have this culture, but I'm a little bit concerned about the ramifications? What would you say to brands that is kind of like stopping them from having these conversations?
Sure. The reward is bigger than the risk, to be quite honest, and cancel culture is honestly, in my opinion, a whole separate conversation, but you can't be a part of the conversation until you start something. And everyone has made mistakes, and not to be, one of those people, but you have to join the narrative in order to reap the benefits. And you're going to make mistakes along the way. There's some ways where I have to also be cognizant of that I'm pitching a company, but I'm also pitching my community, and like, would I actually purchase this if I'm the target market? I have to ask myself those three questions when I'm putting together a proposal. So I'm challenging our partners to think that way, as well as don't be so hesitant with the loss and only seeking the gains, because there's so much to gain, because this is such an untapped market and it's such an untapped opportunity that honestly, even having the awareness, if we go back to old school marketing of the funnel, we need the awareness piece for your, consumers to really know that you want to align with these type of, cause marketing tactics in order to get to the purchase. And if by in fact they want to go straight to the purchase, well, that's amazing. And if sometimes your awareness piece is a little wonky, there is a scope for you there. And they will want to know why now. They will want to know who is working there. And that's what I'm saying. When we approach these conversations, there's a lot of internal practices that need to be brought to the forefront. And then you bottleneck it at the bottom and say, and then we have this amazing product coming out. Because the people that are working on the product need to look just as excited about it as the people who are putting it in the forefront. So the actual community, because if, to be frank, people of color, we will say, okay, but we need a recommendation.
Right.
We use this insight all the time at Condé of like, Black people listen to other Black people, literally. So if you really want to get something sold, I need to see who looks like me at that place, so I know that it was pre-vetted, and then maybe I'll buy it, maybe I won't. But that awareness piece is still important, so don't be worried about the ramifications. And if in fact that's your biggest worry, then the right people may not be in the room.
Right. I think there was a recent study that was saying 70% of folks will take a product recommendation from someone they're not even friends with, for example. That's so important, especially in when you're taking a look at some of these emerging audiences that we're talking about as well, because there is that emphasis on community that comes through as well. The last piece that I do want to talk about, just rounding out, is just taking a step back a little bit in terms of just a lot of the trends that we are seeing. How would you say that brands have adapted over the course of these very, I would say, disruptive past year and a half? How would you say brands have adapted in terms of some of these really quick cultural moments that are happening and leveraging purpose-driven marketing? Would you say that that's something that brands have been doing well, or it's something where maybe there's a lot of room for improvement?
Yeah, I think short, everyone has room for improvement. Like, let's just be completely honest. Some are doing better than others. And I'll say those that are doing better than others have started this journey a lot longer than some of the newer brands. But then there's some newer brands, and not new as in how long they've been in our awareness scope, but some of the brands who have never touched this topic as one of their values are doing very well because they have opened up to the conversation internally, to be quite honest. So now they're challenging either their sales reps or their creative directors to say, we've always done this. How do we bring this to the front? Or we want to do more of this. How do we do it authentically? Is it in our hiring and retention practices in order to make this a sound campaign? I'll say that we have a long way to go, and to be completely honest, but that is the most exciting thing about being in the digital space, I'll say, and working with inclusive markets. There's another stat out there right now that I think by the year 2050, 1 in 3 people in America will identify fully as multicultural. So what does that mean? And when we think about multicultural, those intersectionalities, how do we will have to constantly challenge ourselves. And myself coming from a publisher, we challenge ourselves to think beyond print. We're challenging ourselves to constantly think beyond creators and influencers and always being a juggernaut in the industry. And now we have to challenge ourselves to make sure we include all voices. And inclusivity does not just include skin color. It includes multi-generations. It includes able-bodiedness. So expanding those scopes constantly. I know it could be scary in the upfront, but be specific about who you want to target and refine that as we move forward, because the possibilities are endless to really make your product mean something beyond. I mean, just taking a step back again, if we talk about the beauty industry and a lipstick brand, I mean, there's not but so many ways we can market a lipstick. Like, let's be realistic. But the values and the packaging, the colors and the ladies who use it and the men that you bring that use it and the non-binary and the able-bodiedness, how accessible it is, it gives that lipstick a whole new identity. But you and your team have to think about that before you even approach, I would say, on the publisher's end, so we can make sure that our values match up perfectly to not, I would say, galvanize these audiences, but really impact them.
Very well said. I think in general, that the brands that don't approach that will end up getting left behind. And we work through it with all of our clients in terms of just having those conversations, spark those conversations. And I hope, and from what I've seen, that is the direction that we're trending. I think that it's our job really to just push them a little bit faster and make it happen quicker. So I think that's it for today. And we are the last session, but thank you for joining us. And we'll see you next time.